Yes, let's go for it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Susi Moser, and I'm a social scientist and senior advisor to the International Social Sciences Council program on transformations to sustainability. I'll be the moderator today for our webinar. Welcome to that, and thank you so much for joining us from, I believe, every continent except for Antarctica for this webinar. It's really exciting to see the interest in our program. So what this is about, you see it here on the screen, is an introduction to ISSC's Transformations to Sustainability program. It is a research action program that features social science in collaboration with the scientists from every discipline and from experts from every walk of life in solutions-oriented research on transformation. We're introducing to you today 3 research projects that ISSC, with the help of the Swedish International Development Corporation, is funding, SIDA. This research is all focused on how do we transform and what do we know about the transformation process to sustainability. We will introduce these 3 projects through representatives from each one of them. We call them Transformative Knowledge Networks, or TKNs. You will hear that probably more than once in this webinar. And they are social science-led, solutions-oriented research that have been launched earlier this year. And each of the TKNs will provide an overview of how they intend to contribute to transformative change towards sustainability and social justice. The webinar is meant for each of you to learn more about what we're doing in this program and to get a sense of others interested in this kind of work. So what we have designed here is an interactive webinar where we will first introduce the program as a whole, and then, as you see here in this on this agenda slide, we will have 3 speed talks, if you will, on each of the projects, and then a good 20 minutes or so reserved for your questions and answers. And let me just very briefly say a word about the logistics. So throughout this webinar, we invite you to submit questions in writing through the question function that you see in your webinar software. Basically, just type it to us, we will track it, and after the speed talks we will bring, the ones that are most pressing or most interesting for all of the speakers to respond to back to the speakers, and they can address them. So hopefully you can learn a lot in that way. If there are additional things that you might like to share or that you have questions on that might be easiest answered through sending a link or an online reference, then we do that just here online. After the webinar, we will collect all these questions and answers, and post them along with a recording of this webinar and the slides via the ISSC website. So you can follow up and get more answers to your questions in that way. So just want to very clearly say that this webinar will be recorded and later, as I said, made available through the ISSC website. So with that, let me just briefly introduce Mathieu Denis, who is the Executive Director of ISSC. I probably won't give his whole CV, but he is a political scientist in his own right, and he is leading ISSC in its current endeavors, including this program. So with that, Matt, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Susie. Hello, everyone. Indeed, my name is Mathieu Denis, Executive Director of the ISSC. Just a few words perhaps as a start just on the ISSC to say that the organization exists since the early 1950s. It is today the main body representing the social sciences at the international level. And the Council coordinates different research and scientific activities, and the Transformations to Sustainability program is certainly one of our flagship activities. Colleagues, friends, today is a great day for us because today we're launching officially the 3 research networks, or as we call them, the Transformative Knowledge Networks of the Transformations to Sustainability program. Now, the program, of course, started a bit earlier. It started about 18 months ago with a vision stemming from the 2013 World Social Science report that the ISSC had produced on global environmental change, a vision that what is urgently needed in the field of global environmental change, is research that is transformative and solutions-oriented, research that focuses on issues of social transformations, but in the context of concrete sustainability challenges, research that is integrated in the sense that it would bring together researchers from different disciplines, but integrated but led by social scientists, and research that is transdisciplinary in approach, in other words, that is co-design and co-produce with societal stakeholders. So what that means is that each of the funded research networks that we're going to hear about today are doing solutions-oriented research on social transformations and sustainability. They are all doing integrated research and research that is co-designed with societal partners. One important characteristic of the program and more generally of the activities of the ISSC is its global nature. So the fact that it's really present in all the world, and with a strong focus on the developing world, or low to middle income countries if you want. So each of the networks that will be presented are again doing work in many different countries from different world regions. Another crucial component of the program is what we call the Global Knowledge Trust. So what the trust is about, it's a series of webinars, like obviously the one we're having today, also conferences, working papers, seminars, etc., by which we'll try to foster learning and exchanges between the research networks, but also synthesize the knowledge that is being produced, knowledge on social transformations, and knowledge as well on how to do transformative research. And the Global Knowledge Trust is really, really important for us, obviously. This is what we think makes this program more than the sum of its networks. One final sentence, perhaps, Susi, simply to acknowledge some of our partners. You've already mentioned the Swedish International Development and Cooperation Agency, who funds this program, SIDA, and of course we're really grateful to them. I'd like to acknowledge the help and support we've received as well from South Africa's National Research Foundation. They help us managing the selection and granting process, as well as our colleagues from Future Earth. Now, the Transformations program is, if you want, the ISSC's research contribution to Future Earth, and we're very happy to see that some of our colleagues from Future Earth are online with us today. If you have more questions, of course, I'll be happy to answer them, but that's it for me for now, so thanks to you, Susi.
Great, thank you, Mathieu. We'll keep questions until the question and answer period, but don't lose them now. Just type them into the question area and we will track them and get back to them later. So while we're switching, Lizzie, over to Eli, to Adrian Ely, can I maybe introduce him in the interim? So we will hear first from the Pathways Transformative Knowledge Network, and it's represented and introduced here by Adrian Ely, who is the Deputy Director and Head of Impact at the STEP Center, which, if you don't know, stands for Social, Technological, and Environmental Pathways to Sustainability. And it's an interdisciplinary global research and policy engagement center uniting development studies with science and technology studies. So, Eli, take it away. I keep saying that. Sorry about that. Adrian, take it away.
Thanks a lot. So, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So yeah, I'm introducing the Pathways Network on behalf of the multiple organisations whose logos are shown here at the bottom of the screen. Pathways is short for Transformative pathways to sustainability, learning across disciplines, sectors, regions and cultures. And the partners bring diversity of knowledge and experience about transformations and about sustainability. So for example, we've got Beijing Normal University that brings expertise in anthropology and social policy, JNU in Delhi, focusing on science policy, environment and health sciences, the African Centre for Technology Studies in Kenya, who focus on science and technology policy and climate. In Europe we have Stockholm Resilience Centre with their focus on social-ecological transformations, and ourselves, the STEP Centre, which is based at the University of Sussex in the UK, and bring innovation studies, development studies and geography to the network. We're co-leading the network with our partners at CENIT, which is the Center for Research on Transformations based in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I think Annabelle Marin, who's the co-lead, is joining us from Sussex, where she is right now. I'm myself in Buenos Aires. Last but not least, we're working with Arizona State University and the National Autonomous University in Mexico, who bring their expertise on agricultural sciences, environmental sciences and ecology. The way that we've designed the network is really to allow cross-learning between North and South, and South-South and North-North. And so hubs have actually paired up to look at particular sectors. The USA, Mexico and India, for example, are both of those hubs are looking at cities and the challenges of water, waste and impacts on livelihoods, health and environment. The Argentinian and UK hubs are focusing on food security and food sovereignty, and reconciling those challenges at local, national and international levels. And in China and in Kenya, our colleagues are looking at low carbon energy transitions that serve the needs of the poor. Now in all of these paired hubs, the contexts are extremely different. So just to illustrate, while our Chinese colleagues are concerned with the social implications of decarbonizing the world's largest greenhouse gas emitter as a nation, in Kenya, where the vast majority of the rural population live without electricity, the focus is on sustainable energy access. And so our colleagues at ACKS are going to be looking at transformations associated with mobile phone enabled pay-as-you-go solar home systems. This is a novel combination of technological and social innovations which have already brought basic services such as light and mobile phone charging to hundreds of thousands of homes across the country. And they'll be interrogating that transformation and also bringing together different groups of stakeholders and knowledge partners to try to steer it in ways that serve social justice and indeed the poorest in the communities. This is really the key contribution that the Transformative Knowledge Network plays. In each case, partners are going to be experimenting with new processes of research, engagement and impact, facilitating exchanges between researchers and knowledge partners in the co-production mode that Mathieu mentioned earlier, and trying to document these changes as they happen. What we decided to do is to use the idea of transformation labs, or T-labs, pioneered by Stockholm Resilience Centre, in order to experiment in this way. These are facilitated multi-actor processes that provide a safe space for sharing understandings, fostering creative thinking, testing new innovations, and also they build on ideas around social innovation, and in particular social innovation labs that have been developed over the past decade or so. We're trying to bring in social ecological dimensions to these processes and also see how they touch down in very different ways in different socio-political and governance contexts across the world. And we're really looking forward to learning about that experimentation and documenting it. So what are our planned activities? Well, a couple of months ago we had the Inception workshop in Buenos Aires, which was the first time we all met, clarified our approach, discussed this idea of T-labs, and learned about the methods that each of the partners were going to use. Later this year we are going to be running our first series of T-Labs. They'll be conducted in all of the 6 hubs, and we're building up to those at the moment by conducting preliminary research. We're going to run a second set of T-Labs 1 year later, and those will actually reflect on the innovations that have been identified and experimented with in the intervening 12 months. So we have a first set of workshops around seeing the system, coming up with identifying innovations, and the second one really about reflection. But in order to document and learn from that process, we're also using surveys. We've sent out the first baseline survey, and we'll be repeating those surveys twice, 2 more times over the lifetime of the project in order to understand the changes that have occurred and how and the role that social science has played in bringing them about. So at the same time as directly impacting change, which is one of the objectives of our work in each hub, we really want to deliver new knowledge about the change process and how transformations can be supported and steered in different contexts. We're going to be documenting all of these activities, including the final workshop, which is going to be hosted in Nairobi in 2018 on our website. But at the same time, we're also building capacity and links between a community of young scholars. This is a photo from some of the early career researchers from our network attending the STEPS Centre Summer School this May. There's going to be more information coming shortly, but if you want to check our website, there's plenty there at the moment. And to end, I'd just like to thank the funders of the Transformations to Sustainability program in Sweden, and also the coordinators, ISSC and South African partners, and say how much we appreciate being given this opportunity to work together across this international network.
Thanks, Adrian. This is great. Great overview of what you're going to do. I'll bring questions to you later from the online submitted questions. So in the meantime, let's switch to Heila Lotz-Sisitka, who is the network lead for the T-Learning Transformative Knowledge Network, and maybe I'll just introduce her while we get her slides up. Heila is professor in education and holds the Murray and Roberts Chair in Environmental Education at Rhodes University in South Africa. And as I said, she leads the T-Learning TKN. So Heila, please introduce your project.
Thank you very much, Susie. And are you able to see my screen at the moment?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Very good.
Okay, so I'm just going to introduce our program, which has got the sort of name called T-Learning, and it's really focusing a little bit on the processes of learning. We're currently working with the notion of activating learning to try to really think in more detail about what we're trying to do with our research, but essentially what we're trying to do is to research transformative and transgressive learning in times of climate change. And I think the main focus of our work is that we know we can't really address climate change without social change, and in that system of thinking is a recognition that learning, of course, is important, but the question is what types of learning and how does this learning take place. And if you look into the sort of major international documents, you'll see, for example, in the IPCC, in UNEP's Foresight report, many of these documents mention learning, but there's very little said about the types of learning and how this learning takes place. So this is what we want to research in some detail in our project. Sorry, I've just got to, let me just move on. Okay, so we have a 9-country knowledge network, Transformative Knowledge Network, and we're trying to focus on the emergence of transformative, transgressive learning at the climate, water, food security, energy, social justice nexus. And in selecting our partners, we use the principle of diversity to try to find the richest possible range of situations in which to do this research. We also tried to find partners that had a strong history of transformative research focusing on learning mediation, and then also multidimensional partners from civil society, policy organizations, and social movements. So in our network we have 2 types of social learning contexts that our different partners are focusing on. In South Africa, we are the main partner. I'm at Rhodes University in the Environmental Learning Research Center. In Ethiopia, we're working with an NGO partner called MELCA. In Vietnam, we're working with a university and policy partner from the Hanoi University of Education and the National Textbook Organization. In Malawi, we're working with LEAD, Southern and East Africa. In Sweden, we're working with Swedest, which is an international center on education for sustainability. And these partners will all be working, if I could say, with groups at a grassroots level, working with learning networks, mainly involving rural and also urban communities. And then each of these will be working with multi-actor partnerships within more tightly geographically bound spaces. And then we'll have a second set of partners in Zimbabwe, which is the partner Garden Africa. In Netherlands, the UNESCO Chair of Social Learning. In Colombia, we're working with the CASA Social Movement Network. And in India, we were working with the Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Education for Sustainable Development and Peace, and they're working with youth social movements. So this cluster of partners will be working more with networked social movements that also are working with multi-active partnerships in a multi-leveled system, which is slightly less tightly geographically bound. So we have those different contexts in which we're doing our research. Our research partners across these different clusters are multi-actor groups, civil society, youth, academics, government, community partners, all of which are expressing vulnerability to these nexus-related issues. And we are then also at the moment in the process of co-designing research at two levels. The first level being the level of our own Transformative Knowledge Network, our partnerships across these 9 countries, and then each of us in turn is doing research co-design in the actual context of social learning practice, which we will be developing into case studies. So here is a picture of our Transformative Knowledge Network. This is from our first meeting, which we recently held here at Rhodes University in South Africa. These are some of the research participants that we are working with on the ground or in our different countries. And it's across these two spaces that we are working with co-engaged, co-designed research. Some of the research processes that we're working with is we're trying to look at the relationship between research and learning, and that research can also be a process of learning as we do this more generative type of action-orientated research. Of course, such research is participatory and learning-centered. And then we're also trying to be a little bit exploratory and try to use more creative, unusual, emergent types of research designs and methods. And we will be developing and writing more about those as they unfold. I think so far in our research co-design process, I think Susi asked me to talk about, what are we learning from the co-design process. So I think one of the key things we're busy with at the moment is the process of reaching agreement, and particularly working out, what our different concepts mean and what they mean in the different contexts of our operation. We're working hard also on listening, particularly trying to understand what it is that we're doing together as we try to learn around these complex issues, nexus issues. And then we're also working on reframing particularly research ethics, but also our research practices so that they can be more co-engaged. And we're trying to capture some of this and begin to share, and then also, of course, develop these methodologies as we start out on this work together. So what I've done is I've just got 2 little examples which will give you a little bit of a more practical sense in terms of what we're doing. Here's one example from MELCA, Ethiopia, and what they're doing specifically is working with counter-hegemonic mapping as a particular type of methodology to stimulate learning and agency at this nexus interface. And they are documenting intergenerational learning processes, the decision-making processes that people are going through as they map the landscape and as they see what is actually happening to the landscape, and then also what kinds of agency and change practices are emerging from the learning processes. The second case study is the one that we're developing here. okay, that we're developing here in South Africa, and that's a learning network which is working on more resilient farming systems at smallholder level. And again, we're building the learning networks and then monitoring the learning interactions, the decision making, the changes in practice, and then of course analyzing this to see what is transformative, what is transgressive, and if so, how and why. And then what we are doing from all of this is we're building what we call an activating learning international research school, and we're trying to capture our approaches, our methodologies, our case studies, the ethics work, the narratives that we're working with, and so on, and we'll be putting all of these onto a website which we're currently designing. Here's just a little picture from our first research school which we hosted recently. And then we're also trying to begin some publishing work, and because we were part of the seed funding system, we've actually managed to publish a few papers already out of the experiences in the seed funding program, which has really helped us to get going, I think, with the larger research program. So I think I also just wanted to thank the ISSC and CEDA and the community at the Transformations program for all of their help, and then just to invite you to watch the space and to look out for our website, which we hope to be launching soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Heila. This is great. And as you're already pointing out to both your websites, both Adrian and you mentioned, but the news about this, I'm sure, will be available on the ISSC website as well. So if you all want to track that, we will make it available to you all. So as we switch to our last introductory speed talk, I want to introduce Ashish Kothari, who is one of the network co-leads of the ACKnowl-EJ Transformative Knowledge Network. He is a founder member of the Indian environmental group Kalpavriksh, and I'm sorry I'm not pronouncing this right. Ashish, you will correct me. He has taught at the Indian Institute of Public Administration, worked on the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan of India, and has worked with Greenpeace International's boards in India and internationally. So with that, Ashish, can I turn it over to you? Great. I can't hear Ashish. Is he online? Ashish, you might be muted, so just make sure that your little microphone is on. Lizzie, you might want to check in. Oh, there you go. Yes, now we have you. Go ahead. Go ahead, Ashish.
Yeah, sorry about that. Can you see the screen?
Yes, go ahead.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to introduce this large, sort of this, I think there's a bit of a time lag here. Anyway, I'll just go on. I'm going to introduce the third project, which is, it's got a large name to it, but the short form is ACKnowl-EJ, which is essentially looking at environmental justice in a very broad framework, and in particular looking at the kind of conflicts and resistance movements relating to what are called development projects, but as we know, they're not necessarily all about development, they're extractive projects and so on, and also the kinds of transformations that people are seeing in their own lives as a result of the resistance movements or protest movements against these projects. That's a screen with all the partners we have. I'm not going to name them all as that will take up part of my time. But as you can see here, there are the partners involve universities, civil society members, and as I explained, all these people and local communities in some of our case study sites. There are 4 major components to the project. One, and I'll go through each of these. One of them is to build on an existing database which is called the Environmental Justice Atlas, or the EJ Atlas, and use the several hundred, actually almost 2,000 cases that we have or will be putting on of environmental justice conflicts and resistance movements to take the analysis further, and I'll explain that in a minute. The second part, which is part of that, is to expand the focus on the Middle East and Northern Africa, which often tends to get neglected. The third is case studies, which will involve co-production of knowledge amongst different sections of society. And the fourth one, which is kind of relatively new, is to look at alternative or transformational alternatives and create a dialogue amongst them. Going into each of these in a little bit of detail, we have about 1,500 cases of resistance and environmental justice conflicts around the world on the EJ Atlas, and we hope to add another 300 to 400 as part of the project, and then start actually doing multi-sectoral and across geographies analysis, which helps to point to some of the major things like mining or hydroelectricity projects. It enables us to look at, it also enables us to look at trends in particular sectors like mining. This will also involve building on or creating new featured maps, such as the one you see right now here on climate justice, but also new ones on hydroelectricity projects, mining, and other sectors. This kind of work, we hope, will help also both researchers and activist organizations in different parts of the world, with providing them some sort of a data backup and analysis which can help them in their struggles. This will also, it will also be possible to do this at a national or a sub-national level in some parts of the world. The second major focus, which is part of the Atlas but also beyond, is to look at, as I said, the Middle East and the North African region. Our partners in the Lebanon, in Algeria, in Turkey, and elsewhere will be trying to assess a very, very complex and complicated situation there, which is a whole mix of environmental degradation, war, and many other such issues. And we hope to take up some instances or cases which bring together an analysis of this complex situation. The third one is detailed case studies in some parts of the world. I've given the countries there, India, Bolivia, Lebanon, Turkey, Peru, well, one of the three, Peru, Guatemala, and Argentina. This will involve cases on things like mining, hydroelectricity projects, and waste, and the sorts of environmental injustices that are created through these. But they will also involve transformation alternatives, for instance, looking at food cooperatives, looking at the successful struggle to gain territorial rights and then start doing one's life planning through indigenous peoples, and also alternative worldviews that are emerging from struggles in countries like Bolivia and India, as a kind of a contrast to the prevailing dominant development mentality that is pushed on all of us across the world. These case studies will involve social science researchers, natural science researchers, but also local civil society groups and the indigenous people and the local communities as equal research partners through methodology that we're currently working out. The fourth one is transformative alternatives, looking at what kinds of alternative practices and worldviews are emerging from struggles around the world and how those could actually inform and help other struggles which are kind of, protest struggles or struggles of resistance but have not necessarily articulated alternatives. So this is something that we will do. Also will involve developing methodology for looking at conflict transformation and also alternatives transformation. The University of East Anglia and my group Kalpavriksh are currently actually working on developing these frameworks further, and then we'll meet in September to merge them, to try and put them together so that there's a comprehensive format or an analytical framework which can be used by communities themselves who are involved in these transformations. They can be used by researchers or by anybody who's wanting to understand what kind of transformations are taking place. We hope to also hold a a more open workshop in December at the University of East Anglia, where this can be these frameworks can be shared with others. Finally, we are also hoping that
did we just lose
yeah.
Ashish? Oh, there you go. Ashish, say can you say the last sentence again on this dialogue issue, because we just lost audio for a second.
Okay, yeah, so we're also hoping that apart from working on the case studies and understanding the alternative practices and worldviews, that we should be able to bring them together in some form of dialogue. We're not yet quite sure exactly how we will do this. We're working on the methodology, but it'll be great if we can actually have an intercultural dialogue amongst indigenous peoples and others who are coming up with these alternative worldviews. I just put a handful of them up on the screen there, but there will be many more. There will also be a specific output coming out of this and another project, which is what we call a post-development dictionary, which is actually trying to put a lot of these alternative worldviews together into a single volume, written by authors from around the world. So that's in a nutshell. I mean, there's of course much more detail available. That's the website over there, and the two contact emails of the coordinators. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ashish. That was a great overview as well. So we got a few questions, and as we move to those, I want to actually ask you each to say something, maybe speak to one of the questions that cuts across all of your networks, and that is that one of the unusual features of the ISSC's T2S program is this focus on transdisciplinarity, and you already began to speak to this, but I'm wondering if each of you maybe just briefly could say a word about what's been challenging of enacting that, and also what's been exciting and enlightening about working with partners across and particularly outside of academia. So I'm wondering if each of you could speak to this, and Adrian, can I just start with you and go down the list as we just had it?
Yeah, so I think most of our partners are used to working in a transdisciplinary mode, or at least involving different stakeholders in the research process. I think that what has been interesting this time around is being a lot more explicit about involving other knowledge partners in the design of the research and actually documenting that process. Now, in Europe, where we developed our research design around sustainable food production and consumption, there is a culture of moving outside the academe to work with civil society groups and with policymakers. I think in some of the other countries where our partners are working, especially working with civil society groups is not so common, although we did manage to do that, for example, in China. And engaging with policymakers as a matter of course is also undertaken using different rules and norms. I think that it's been a real learning experience for all of us, and one which we hope to document going forward, about how that relationship between research and knowledge production and policy making and the power behind knowledge uptake and use actually differs in these very different governance contexts. We're just beginning to recognize those differences, but I think that this is a really exciting opportunity to actually think about them explicitly and document them.
Yeah, great. Heila, what would you say?
Yeah, I think for us also, I think similarly many of our partners have been working in transdisciplinary ways for quite a long time. I think also because we've been very much involved with sort of engaged learning processes. But the one thing that we've been talking quite a lot about since we've established our Transformative Knowledge Network and the design of our research is, you know, to really give enough time for the processes that are necessary for mobilizing knowledge in practice. And that's like a double-sided process because it's a sort of practice informing knowledge and knowledge informing practice. And to really understand what is involved with that, it often gets sort of, you know, painted over quite smoothly as if it just happens, but of course it doesn't. So there's a lot in that particular process that we're trying to uncover a little bit more with our research. And then also, we've also talked a lot about how this type of research completely transforms traditional concepts of research ethics, in particularly as they've been developed in the academy. So we are also trying to, you know, write up new ways of thinking about research ethics. So those are the two key things that have come up, I think, for us in the last while, if I could say that.
Great, wonderful. How about you, Ashish? What's your perspective from as being someone outside of academia?
Yeah. I think adding on to what Adrian and Heila said, I think one of our main challenges and sort of exciting opportunities in this project is to look at the co-production of knowledge with local communities and indigenous peoples. In situations or circumstances, for instance, a couple of sites we'll be doing in India where there is in fact very little exposure to academics. And so for the academics who will be involved, for the civil society groups, including mine, that will be involved, and for the indigenous peoples who will be involved, I think it's going to be a steep learning curve. There are, of course, some of us have a little bit of experience with doing this, but you know, it goes beyond just language. Language, of course, is an issue in extremely multicultural or cultural diversity areas like ours. But it's also about the pace of learning. It's about giving priority not just to the written and the spoken, but also just to the observed. It's about, you know, learning about conflicts and transformation through just observation and being silent, and so on. So I think there's a whole bunch of sort of research transformations that have to happen when we do this, and I think it's going to be enormously exciting, but also quite challenging. So I guess that's the one additional point I would put to what Adrian and Heila just said.
Great, thank you. Now let me turn to the questions that have come in, and one very generic one I just want to quickly answer, which is the question, can we kindly share the PowerPoints after the webinar? Yes, we will, along with the audio taping of this recording and any other information through the ISSC's Transformations website. We will see at the end, so we'll share all of it. There's another question that I'll quickly address, but maybe Mathieu, you can pick up as well, and that is how can I involve my university in the TKNs, although we have not been part of the projects at their inception. So each of these projects put forward a proposal with a budget and with specific activities and partners, and that budget is already quite tight and has, you know, is basically reserved for the work that the teams proposed. That doesn't mean there can't be an exchange, but I think just adding on to that would require much additional time, resources, and funding to do that. So the projects themselves, I don't think are, you can all correct me wrong if you want partners, but in my understanding, they're not just open for business in terms of just, you know, expanding indefinitely to others, but that doesn't mean you can't be involved in the exchange around what each of these teams are learning. We will have other webinars like this and other forms of staying in touch. So again, this is something that we're exactly hoping to build, a larger exchange of you know, of ideas around transformation. And maybe, Mathieu, before I hand it over to you, can I add one other question which came in from Uchendu Chigbu, which is the question whether the Brexit will affect the T2S networks and research in Europe. So maybe you can pick up those two questions and I'll come back to the questions for the TKNs.
Well, thanks, Susie. Thanks for the two questions. Well, indeed, I mean, I won't add much to what you said, but there are possibilities of getting involved in what we call the global knowledge trusts and the larger networks. So I would just encourage you to send your details to the program coordinators, so that we make sure to include you in all information that goes out and about our activities, etc. On the Brexit, I must say that I have no idea. We actually today there is a meeting at the Research Council of the UK where this issue is being addressed, and we have someone there for us, representing us and asking exactly those questions. I doubt that in the immediate future that would have any impact, although that needs to be seen.
Great, thank you. I mean, the projects are funded at this point, so the immediate impact on those, I don't think there will be any on that. So let me then move on to specific questions that have come in for the different projects. Tracy van Holt has asked the questions, Adrian, to you regarding steps. Could you provide a specific example of maybe one of your T-Labs and ideas of what you will be dealing with there, and the type of experiments or projects that you propose?
Well, thanks very much for the question. I can give you a specific example about a T-Lab. I'm not the best person to talk about the T-Labs which are taking place in 5 of the hubs, but I can tell you about the T-Labs that are planned in the UK, and those are focusing on sustainable food production and consumption around a national park, the South Downs National Park, and also the newest UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, which is the Brighton and Lewis Downs Biosphere Reserve. What we are going to be doing towards the end of this year is interviewing farmers and producers from within that area and trying to understand the constraints that they face when selecting management practices, food production management practices that are more environmentally sustainable. We'll also be talking to others in the supply chain to understand how demand actually affects the uptake of more or less sustainable food production practices. And later this year, what we hope to do is to bring together people from across the supply chain to try to develop novel ways of connecting consumers who are interested in more sustainable local food and producers from around that, the National Park and Biosphere Reserve, in a way that actually helps what is in fact at this point a small niche that's serving the demand for sustainable food to grow into a much larger component of the food and agriculture system. That's an example from the UK. Now, in terms of what the innovation will be, the point of the T-Lab is that it is at the T-Lab, or it is through the T-Lab. It's not just the one workshop, but it's the process of gathering those stakeholders together and also connecting them over a longer period. It's through that process that the innovations are going to be identified. They may be technology-based, they may be policies, they may be new groupings or alliances. We can't say in the UK case precisely what that will look like. Now, in the other 5 hubs, the approaches are very different. I know in Mexico they're using a new tool that enables different stakeholders' perceptions of water and waste issues in Mexico City to actually be more explicit, and that allows, when bringing different stakeholders together, it allows them to really understand the very different framings of sustainability held by the different actors. In Latin America, in the Argentina case, and Annabelle is far better placed than me to talk about this, they're really talking about what agriculture means for different stakeholders. Is it about exports? Is it about commodities? Or is it about food security and food sovereignty at local levels? And trying to bridge those different perspectives. Precisely what innovation will emerge is not clear yet, but they are interested in looking at open source seed systems.
Great. Thank you, Adrian. That's great. There's another question for Ashish from the ACKnowl-EJ project. And before I say that, I just received a little note from one of the ACKnowl-EJ partners, Daniela Del Bene, who said, we have just released a call for collaborative mapping projects which are open to the public. Small budget, but it's a way to get involved. So this may be just as an additional point to the previous question on how to get involved. So in case you're interested in that, mapping different movements and conflicts and resistance efforts, then please be in touch with the ACKnowl-EJ project. And so with that, maybe Ashish, the question that came to you in particular had to do with your mention of the mining initiatives and trying to analyze them more profoundly. The question was, can you tell us more on the type of actors included or excluded? What are the challenges in mapping out these large conflict networks?
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, this is work that's being done more by my colleagues who are on the call right now, Daniela and Mariana. I don't know if they'd like to jump in. But as we know, mining and other extractive activities are amongst the largest impact areas of industrialization across the world now, especially in the global south, but also in the north. So what this involves is local civil society actors or the communities themselves who are impacted by mining and or researchers who are working with them being able to put up analysis and cases from different parts of the world of what's happening, who is doing it, what the impacts are, what the kind of resistance movements against them are, and what the challenges that people are facing. This enables 2 or 3 kinds of things. It enables, for instance, if you want to track what, let's say, aluminium is doing across the world, the EJ Atlas and the case studies would help us to understand what exactly, if, for instance, I'm using aluminium in my house, what does it really mean for people and the environment around the world? Or it helps to track a particular company. You can take Rio Tinto or Shell or any of these companies who are involved in large-scale extractive industry and look at their global footprint by using the atlas and the cases. And all of this information and analysis then can feed back into local struggles who are able to connect what is happening locally also to what's happening globally, and it often has helped to strengthen their hands. It also, of course, enables much greater media coverage for things like this, which then puts pressure on governments and companies concerned. So I guess these are some ways in which, in particular with mining, this project would be able to hopefully help with environmental justice movements and transformation.
Great, thank you. And one last question to Heila. And Heila, we just have a couple of minutes before we have to close, but I think it's a nice follow-on to this, what you just explained, Ashish. And the question is, how can these knowledge networks help bring attention to and possibly slow the war being waged on indigenous peoples, as for example in India? But I want to direct it to you, Heila, because you're also working with social movements and are bringing attention to their struggles. So I'm wondering if you could maybe speak to that, and then we'll close out from there.
Thank you very much. And I think you know, what we're trying to work on is actually the issue of people's learning and how you make the what you call collective learning processes actually work. So I guess what we're trying to do in most of our projects, we're working a lot also with indigenous communities and trying to look at modes and modalities of collective learning and how that collective learning actually becomes a form of activism and a forms of change in activity. One of the things that we also discussed in our setup workshop was the issue of the, what narratives do we bring into the learning processes and how do we transform the narrative. So we don't want to bring the dominant narrative into the learning process. We need to look for the kinds of alternatives that Ashish was also mentioning earlier when he was talking about the reframing of narratives, alternative discourses. So we've talked a lot about that, and then to try to develop the learning modalities that will allow those expressions to come to the fore and for people's voices to be more heard and more widely heard through these kinds of,
Thank you. That's really great, and I think both of what you're doing in your project, I think, are great examples of bringing attention to these struggles. So one of the ways in which you can keep learning about this is by staying in touch with the program, and I just put up the slide here of the various ways in which you can track what's going on with the program, with each of the projects, and what they're learning and how they're bringing attention to the struggles of transformation. I want to just say, maybe in conclusion, with a big thank you to each of the presenters and for all of you attending, that this is such a unique opportunity here with the ISSC's program on transformations to place attention for once, not on the physical, ecological dimensions of change only, which of course are critical, but they're for us sort of the impetus or the context in which social change happens, social transformation, with pathways. What are the ways in which we could get to transformation? What's the role of learning, and what's the role of resistance or conflict in making transformative changes? I think this is really an amazing opportunity for us to learn more about these social processes that are absolutely essential to make the deep changes that we need. And so I just, again, want to invite you all to stay in touch, to get involved, to share with us your findings, your insights through the research and work that you do in the world. And with that, I just simply want to thank you all for being part of today's webinar, and to stay in touch with us for future webinars. And as Mathieu said, this is a contribution to Future Earth and its Transformative Knowledge Action Network, so there are many ways to stay in touch and bring attention to the big need and urgent need for transformations to sustainability. So with that, thank you to all of you, and we will be in touch for the next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.